Welcome back to Chapter 8 of Finding Serendipity by Angelica Banks. I am one half of Angelica Banks, as you know. I am Heather Rose when I'm not wearing a fancy wig and looking like Serendipity Smith. And my other half of Angelica Banks is Danielle Wood, and together we made a pen name, Angelica Banks, to make things easy. And here is Finding Serendipity in its American edition. And I'll just show you, because I can. Here are the 3 German editions. So here is Tuesday. It's called Tuesday and the Silver Thread, and which is Finding Serendipity. And then Tuesday, or the Week Without Tuesday. And then Blueberry Pancakes Forever is the Year Without Summer. So they have different names in Germany. Isn't that interesting? But they're beautiful editions, and they look like fairy stories, of course. So they're really magnificent. But let's get on with Chapter 8. So as we know, Tuesday was heading into the peppermint forest. Deep in the peppermint forest, the creatures of the night had returned to their burrows, nooks and nests to rest. Other forest inhabitants were shaking themselves awake and clearing their throats. Soon the air would ripple with birdsong, and the forest would take on the soft green glow of daytime. Fronds would unfurl, small footprints would appear on damp pathways, worms and caterpillars would begin their steady progress along stems of grass or the branches of trees. Spiderwebs would catch the first light, and maybe an early morning fly for breakfast. But in one particular towering ancient peppermint tree, someone had no intention of waking up. Every tree in the forest was beautiful in its own special way, but this particular tree held a house high in its broad branches. It was a small octagonal house surrounded by a wide veranda. It had oval windows and a thatched roof. The woven timbers of the veranda railings were intertwined with a red creeper that attracted the attention of brightly coloured butterflies. From the veranda, suspended walkways disappeared off between other trees and into the forest canopy. Lying in a hammock slung from the branches above, Vivienne Small was sleeping with her blue wings folded beneath her. Her hair was wild, dark and curly, held back from her face with a circlet of plaited leather. Her right ear, but not her left, was pointed like an elf's. Except for the fact that she was very small, about half the size of an ordinary girl, she looked the way girls look when they're asleep. That is, mostly harmless and somewhat unkempt. If her eyes had been open, you would have seen that they were grey-green and capable of looking completely ferocious. And if her wings had been extended, you would have seen that they were more like the wings of a bat than those of a butterfly, since they were jagged and leathery. Vivienne had gone to bed just a few hours before, still wearing her knee-high boots, though she had taken the time to loosen their laces. Her face was smudged with what might have been soot, but was in fact gunpowder, and her hands were covered in scratches from a desperate climb. It was unlike Vivienne to sleep in, but she had come to the end of a particularly long and gruelling adventure only the day before. Her elbows and knees wore the savage grazes that she had sustained during her final battle with Karsten Mothwood, and her chest and back were blotchy with bruises. Her ribs ached, one wing was painfully torn, and she had a colossal bump on the back of her head. She flicked one hand at the air beside her ear, as if to brush away an annoying buzzing fly. But the sound that had woken her did not go away. Vivienne's pointed right ear had discerned the thud of a heavy footfall on the forest floor. The noise echoed through the roots of the trees and rustled up through the leaves. She opened her eyes and leapt out of her hammock, wincing at the pain in her ribs and her wing. She heard the snapping of twigs, the crushing of leaves, and the toppling of toadstools as feet pummeled the earth. Vivienne sniffed, and her nose filled with the unmistakable smell of revenge. "Mothwood's men, blast them," Vivienne said under her breath. After the final defeat of Mothwood, Vivienne had made her way home across the restless sea in her little sailboat, Vivacious. As she had rounded the last point into Nautilus Cove, the closest landing point to her treehouse, she thought she had glimpsed a small shadowy boat pursuing her in the moonless night. But she had been so utterly exhausted that she had dismissed it as a phantom of her imagination and continued on her way home. Followed? How could I have been so careless? She whispered crossly. Vivienne made her way noiselessly around her treehouse, making preparations. She filled a quiver with turquoise feathered arrows, slipped the strap of the quiver over her shoulder, and leaned her bow against the veranda railings in readiness. She fetched her Lucretian blowpipe and strapped a pouch full of poisoned darts around her waist. She peered over the railing. Down through branches and plumes of leaves, Mothwood's men had circled the base of her tree. There were 8 of them. Vivienne cursed herself again for being so careless. After years of infinite trouble to keep her treehouse concealed, she had let its location be known. "Vivienne Small!" called a pirate with a skull tattooed across his face. Her only reply was to take careful aim. "This is for Mothwood!" the pirate roared. No sooner had he buried the sharp head of his axe into the trunk of the tree than Vivienne's arrow sped towards him, weaving through the branches and leaves, striking the pirate through his thick neck. Whooping and laughing gave way to cries of outrage and fury as the pirate dropped to the ground. His comrades swung their axes in unison, metal biting into ancient timber. But Vivienne Small was not overly concerned. The tree was enormous, and the timber of its trunk was as hard as iron, and there were only 8 pirates below. She lifted her Lucretian blowpipe to her lips. With deadly aim she let fly, and a dart buried itself deep in the eye of the pirate she had already wounded with her arrow. She watched as he fell instantly unconscious, the poison in her dart's tip coursing through his body. He would not wake until nightfall, and by that time Vivienne would have him and his shipmates bound and safely deposited where they could no longer do harm. The remaining pirates roared in anger and redoubled their efforts, hacking at the tree trunk with all their might. "For Mothwood!" they chanted, landing blow after blow. The birds that had made their homes in the tree raised a chorus of disquiet, abandoning their nests and branches. The tree noted a mild vibration through its trunk and leaves, but remained unperturbed. Then, into the clearing came another 8 pirates. They were carrying a giant 4-man saw. The tree shivered. Vivienne lifted her bow in rage and fired at another pirate, then another and another. One she struck in the chest, another in the back of the neck. None of the fallen got up again, but lay on the ground howling in pain. Soon she would silence them all with her blowpipe, but first her arrows would work faster to disarm her attackers. She was about to release another turquoise-feathered bolt when she heard an ominous sound, the whoosh of wings beating the air. Vivienne swung around, ready to release the arrow poised in her bow, but it was too late. Mothwood's enormous crow was upon her. He was the size of an albatross with a gleaming black beak. He had wrinkled grey skin around his small black eyes and a body that was a mess of unkempt feathers and bald patches. He may have been almost 300 years old, but this was a bird of uncanny strength and wit. Baldwin was his name, though Vivienne had another name for him. Bald One, Vivienne Small hissed. "Vivienne Small!" the crow shrieked as he fell upon her. With his powerful beak, Baldwin grabbed Vivienne's bow, tearing it from her hands and flinging it away into the forest below. Vivienne reached for her blowpipe, snatching a new dart from the pouch at her side, but the bird was too quick. Flying at her face, he aimed his claws at her eyes. Instinctively, Vivienne slapped her hands to her face to protect herself, and in that one swift movement, the dart she had in her hand grazed her cheek. It was only a graze. It barely sliced the first layer of skin, but it was enough for the powerful poison to take effect. She fell instantly to the floor of the treehouse and lay there quite still. The crow cawed in victory, while below a giant saw rasped into action. The vicious metal blade of the saw gnawed and bit as the pirates sweated at their task. Soon it had sunk through a quarter of the enormous trunk, then half, and then a full 3/4 of the ancient tree. Still that tree refused to fall. The pirates continued, pairs of exhausted men taking turns to work at either ends of the saw. As they worked, they looked up cautiously from time to time into the web of branches above. Every man wondered what had become of Vivienne Small and her arrows. "Done a runner is what?" said one of the pirates. "Not her, not likely," said another. "She'll have something up her sleeve, we know that. Heave to, you blackguards, before she springs us a trap." "Maybe Baldwin has pecked out her eyes," someone suggested, and all of the pirates chuckled. High above them, Vivienne Small lay unconscious as the effects of the tiny scratch from the dart slowly worked their way through her body. Baldwin the crow was sitting on her chest, staring right at her, as if he did indeed intend to peck out her eyes and eat them. "Vivienne Small is dead!" he squawked. "Vivienne Small is dead!" If the dart had gone deeper, she might have been unconscious for a whole day and a night. As it was, Vivienne woke as the tree was starting to tilt in final anguish. "No, Crow, Mothwood is dead!" Vivienne yelled as she flung herself up, spread her injured wings painfully, and knocked the bird away. She felt the tree quiver beneath her. There was a shriek of splitting wood. The tree and the tree house pitched sidewards as the saw sliced clean through the trunk. Vivienne clung to the railing. The crow flew at her again, claws swiping at her eyes. Then it gave a shrill cry and fled. Vivienne braced herself for the inevitable plunge to the ground, but for one moment, as if in a final embrace, the nearby trees held her tree and her home. It was all the time she needed. Vivienne leapt onto a railing, her leathery wings swelling as they captured the air. Despite the searing pain in her torn wing, she managed to fly the short distance to a nearby walkway. Behind her, the wooden path sheared away as the mighty tree succumbed. Vivienne's ears filled with the scream of splintering branches. It hit the forest floor with a crescendo that shook the ground for miles around. In the aftermath, there was no sound at all. No birds called, nor grasshoppers sang, no crickets chirped and no bees hummed. The forest was utterly silent. And then a great cheer went up from Mothwood's men. And that is the end of chapter 8. I'll see you back for chapter 9.